Hi, welcome to the Stedman podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the events that happen in Baghdad on Sunday. So stay tuned and listen right here on the Stedman podcast. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Stedman podcast. It is June 6th at 4:21 p.m. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Stanton, Virginia. And today I really want to talk about, first, before I even talk about what I want to talk about today, I want to just wish all my listeners, hopefully you had a great 4th of July. Talking about Independence Day, the day that we no longer were ruled by British rule, that we are a free country. And because of everything that happened back in the 1776 with the Declaration of Independence and all the events that transpired during that time, we are able to have the freedom to I wouldn't say the freedom to do whatever we want, but most importantly, we have the freedom to worship however we want. We have the freedom to be able to do any career that we want. If you want to be a policeman, you can be a policeman. If you want to be a genetic engineer, you can be a genetic engineer. So there's a lot of freedoms that come that we appreciate today that we wouldn't have had back in like the early 1700s. So with all that being said, it was kind of sad to hear about the bombing that happened in Baghdad, Iraq. With everything that happened with that. And I know a lot of times this wasn't broadcast in the news. I only found out about it because I believe it was my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law actually lives over in Northern Ireland, and through the BBC, she ended up sharing this thing about the bombing that happened in Baghdad. And I remember, just seeing that and just seeing how none of our American news outlets were reporting any of it. And I don't know if it was because it was close to Independence Day, so everybody wanted to broadcast things about the election and broadcast fireworks and broadcast everything about the freedoms we have in America. We kind of forgot that there was a big bombing that happened in Baghdad. And I know there are some people who say, well, how come when Paris was bombed by the Islamic State, everyone changed their profile picture to either the peace sign with the Eiffel Tower in the middle, or they had a transparent color of the French flag. And then when I believe it was Brussels, when they got attacked, that there was the color of their flag. But how come there was no postings of the Iraq flag? How come there was nothing like that? And there are some people who are upset that there was as of right now, 250 people that have died in this bombing, and it's the deadliest attack since 2003, when the United States went over and started bombing after 9/11. And when you think about the amount of death that had happened, and it's just horrifying. It's horrifying to see that there are so many people that died because of one group's ideology, and that's kind of scary in some ways. And I know it was reading earlier stories about what happened in Baghdad, how there was people who grave diggers who there was a report about a grave digger who digs 70 graves to put people in, and after he dug these 70 graves to put people in, they're saying, "Oh, you got to dig more. You got to dig more." And here's these guys just digging and digging and digging, and it's just mortifying for the fact that here's these people who are digging these graves, and they just have to keep digging and expanding this lot to bury all these people. There was another story where there's people who really had to sit and look through shard remains of these people to try to identify them, so they could let family members know, to let to let them know that their loved ones were victims in this bombing. And you see all this, and it's two things happens. We can look at this, we can say, "Oh, this is horrible, this is bad," and then we can go back to life as normal over here in the United States. We can eat meals, we can go out to eat, we can do all this. So it's almost like, "Oh, we're sorry for your loss, we're praying for you." However, after about a couple days, once these stories begin to die down, which for most people the story has already died down, because not many people know that this is an ongoing news story, because we're not seeing it over in America. There's, we just go back on to our lives, and it's heart-wrenching. And for those who had family members or friends or even co-workers who were affected by this bombing, and I know I don't have a lot of listeners in the Middle East listening to my podcast, but my prayers are with you, and I'm so sorry that this happened. I'm so sorry that that this bombing took a life, took your friend, took your wife, took your husband, took your brother, took your sister. For some of you, maybe even took your pet, took your children. Like, that's very horrible. And it's sad. It really is. I just don't really have any words to kind of describe what's going on. And it's very interesting, because I talked to a guy who I've just made acquaintance with in the area, and he's actually originally from Egypt. And I was talking with him, and his big thing is trying to get churches together, just people together once a month to just pray for our country, to pray for our families, to pray for our churches, to pray for our government. Even pray for our city and state. So there's a lot of, and that's just kind of his focus. But one of the interesting things is he said, when growing up as a boy in Egypt, he was saying, there wasn't a lot of fighting, there wasn't a lot of tension over there in Egypt. Sure, I mean, you're close to the Middle East, so you're going to get involved with some of the happenings that were going on over there. And again, this guy's a lot much older than I am, and he was talking about how things were great, and then all of a sudden things started to turn, and he started to talk a little bit about kind of the three things that happen that really kind of caused the downfall in Egypt, and just kind of the atmosphere over there, and especially that allowed militant groups to be able to take control over there. And he talked a little bit about how the first thing that kind of happens is basically the economy. Once the economy starts to do bad, when there's recessions, that starts to pave the way for a lot of hardships and a lot of these splinter groups to kind of emerge because of finances. And then you begin to see a shift in political in the politics, you start to see a lot more fighting. You start to see a lot more dissension among political groups. You start to see a lot of bad mouthing, and especially you see a lot of shady things that happen with politicians, and it's almost like the news reports it, but it's almost kind of like, it's not really a big deal. So things just kind of, we'll talk about it, but then we're going to quickly kind of put it under the rug. And then he said the last thing had to do with religion, where eventually, when it comes to people practicing their faith, that you're no longer able to practice your faith. There's a lot more hardships, a lot more discipline on organized religion. And then once you start to chip away at a country's finances, you start to take away a country's politics, and you start ticking away and putting restrictions on a country's religion, then that's really where the seeds of deception and the seeds of destruction start to yield. And I mean, if you think about, and I mean, I'm not going to talk about, the Christians versus Muslims, or Christianity versus Islam. I'm not going to really focus too much on that aspect. But like, if you think about Baghdad, you think about Iraq, like a majority of the religion there is Islamic. And the fact that you have the Islamic State blowing up people who are practicing Muslims, who practice the religion of Islam, and you just kind of see the turmoil. And what this my Egyptian buddy says, he says, he had seen it firsthand happen in his country in Egypt. He's seen it happen over in the Middle East, and as he's been over here in America for only a few years, he's really seeing the same trend happen with the 2008 recession. And even though things are starting to get better in the economy, that we still kind of feel the effects of that. There are still people who've graduated school in a certain field, and they're still having difficulty finding jobs because the recession kind of halted people retiring and new people coming in. We've also seen, obviously, we can look at our politics, and we've kind of seen a deterioration of American politics, and especially when we look at the news yesterday. We see that Donald Trump says a bunch of crazy stuff and says some crazy things. We also see the whole thing with the whole email scandal in Benghazi, and just kind of that shadow that's over Hillary Clinton. And we also just kind of saw that, after the Clinton administration, the Clintons and the Obama administration and the FBI sat together, and basically the FBI says that they weren't going to probe her anymore with the whole email scandal, even though a lot of people saw that as a threat to American security, that it wasn't on a private thing, it was her own personal private email. And, people are just not trusting our politicians. So we're starting to see a dissension within American politics. And then we've seen in 2008, we've had the finances. And then now we kind of see the our kind of the fall of American politics, as some news reports are kind of coining this election to be. And now, the next thing to do is we're going to start seeing some restrictions on religious belief and religious practice. Not only Christianity, but probably even with Buddhism and Judaism and even Islam. And eventually, it's almost kind of like it almost seems like that there's a lot of, we could very much end up in the same boat as the rest of these countries that have gone through a similar pattern. So it's very interesting just kind of seeing from someone else's perspective, from someone else's eyes and someone else's knowledge on how they saw things happen the fall of their own country and kind of see similar things happening in ours. So at the end of the day, we really just need to continue to, to be bold. We need to continue to pray. Just pray for our country. And that was one thing my buddy said. He said when he was a little boy, it was practice that every morning, every Egyptian would pray for their leaders, their government leaders. And the reason why everyone would pray for their government leaders is to make sure that they had healthy families, that their minds were healthy, that God would give them wisdom to be able to make moral choices. And that was something that they did every morning, because that was kind of, I don't know if it was required of them, but I think that was just kind of the unwritten rule, that that's what we do, because we want to make sure that our country continues to prosper, our country continues to be free, and that our country doesn't fall into disarray. And, and at some point that kind of stopped, especially once the political things started to get out of control. People just stopped praying for their government officials, and sure enough, there's decisions that were made that basically allowed these splinter terrorist groups, whether it was the Islamic State or anybody else, to be able to come in and kind of take control over the government and kind of create a culture of fear, a culture of confusion, a culture of violence, a culture of dissension. So, so there's a lot of, there's just a lot of things that take heart. So when it comes to our politics in America, when it comes to religion in America, when it comes to our finances in America, we need to pray about these things. We need to continue to pray about these things and ask God to give us wisdom. We need to ask God to be able to break down any walls. We need to ask God to renounce any spirits that's not from Him, that's kind of putting a stranglehold not only on our country, but even the rest of the world. And, my Egyptian friend, one of the things he said is that, everybody in Egypt always looked to America as being a country that was powerful, being a country that is just, and especially being a country that is spiritual. And now they've kind of view America as being weak. And that's kind of his big thing is, let's pray for our country. We need to strengthen America back again, so that when we are strong, then we can be that example to the rest of the countries, that they too can be strong, that they too can be able to stand tall and be bold in the face of adversity. So just to kind of conclude this podcast, again, continue to pray for our world, especially pray for Baghdad and even the country of Iraq. Just continue to pray for them, pray for healing, as people in the government and everyone else just tries to pick up the pieces of their lives. And especially just pray for one another too, that we can continue to be strong and be bold in our faith, and especially pray for our political situation. And hopefully everything turns out that, if we believe that God is in control, then God will pick the right person will be in office, and hopefully they will do what God requires them to do. All right, so that is all the time I have. Thank you so much for listening. Again, you can, I like to hear your thoughts and your comments. You can just go ahead and go over to my website, thescottstedman.com. You can ask me anything. I'll try to, for the notes of the show part that I have on my blog. I will try to put some articles about the bombing in Baghdad, so you can kind of get a little bit more of a picture if you're unfamiliar with what's been happening so far with the country, with the city of Baghdad. And one thing I'm very excited about is next week we are going to have a special guest. His name is Nathan Anderson. Nate is a great buddy of mine. He was a church planter, a pastor, and he's going to talk about a little bit about his experience in the ministry. So it's going to be a good time of listening. So again, I hope you'll tune in and listen to that podcast. All right. Well, I hope you guys are having a wonderful week, and I will talk to you later. Bye.